let's go one-on-one. Erin Buzuvis is a Western New England University law professor and director of the Center for Gender and Sexuality Studies at Western New England and joins us live. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks for having me.
What did you take away from today in the Supreme Court?
Oral arguments, I don't think there were too many surprises. I think we saw justices from the expected conservative wing coming up with some hard questions for the opponents of Proposition 8, and we saw justices on the more traditionally liberal wing with some hard questions for the law's defenders. And I think that the good money is on the Supreme Court taking a narrow approach and issuing a decision that applies to California in particular, possibly some other states, but as your reporter said, probably not making a sweeping that would affect gay marriage in any state. However, just saying that that's where the good money is doesn't necessarily mean it's as hard to predict the court's outcome as it is to predict the winners of the NCAA basketball tournament. I know my #1 pick is already out, so
I'm still in there.
Anything could happen at the Supreme Court as well.
Absolutely. So they also hear the Defense of Marriage Act later this week. How is that different from Proposition 8 in the sense of the type of testimony we're going to be hearing inside the Supreme Court?
Sure. The Defense of Marriage Act is a federal law that, at least in the part that's being challenged before the court right now, defines marriage for federal law purposes as being between one man and woman. So that means that in states like Massachusetts, where same-sex couples can get married, their marriages don't count under federal laws like filing joint federal income taxes, for example. Social Security and other kinds of federal benefits are affected as well. So there the court's going to be deciding whether it's constitutional for Congress to make that kind of distinction and to say that states that recognize gay marriage can't have those marriages count for federal purposes. It raises some different issues, not the least of which is an issue about how appropriate it is to respect states' autonomy on this decision. If states say we validate these kinds of marriages, it's an arguable intrusion into state liberty for the federal government to say, oh, but they don't count all the way.
What are your expectations for that, for the Defense of Marriage? If they're going to be taking a narrow approach on Proposition 8, how does that go with the federal law?
I think the good money is always on a narrow approach. However, I think that a narrow approach is differently defined in the DOMA context. I think if you strike down Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, which I think the court is poised to do. I think that could happen. That's going to affect a federal definition of marriage, but again, it's only going to matter in those states that already recognize gay marriage. So that would be an example of a narrow approach.
Okay, testimony this week. We're not expecting a ruling on this until I think June. Why does it take so long for the Supreme Court? It seems time there are these big cases that go in front of them that it takes so long for them to come up with a decision.
Well, they always, like to leave the hard cases for June, just, because that's where the dramatic impact is, right?
That's right.
No, but, I mean, seriously, the court has like 80 cases a term. Each one of those cases is important to somebody, as this case is important to its litigants. So, I mean, obviously not all of their cases are asking the court to espouse on grand, important constitutional questions, but they all involve important issues of law that the court likes to give careful attention to. After all, they're setting national precedent, enduring precedent in all kinds of cases. So they like to take their time and be careful in all cases. And then about this case in particular, this case has attracted a record number of briefs filed, both for and against Proposition 8, for and against the Defense of Marriage Act. Together, there's something like over 100 briefs that the courts are going to have to wade through. And I think that, as interesting as the oral arguments are as sort of a showpiece, a sort of showcase kind of galvanizing public attention around the issue, the real battle's being fought in the pages of those briefs. And, it's just going to take some time for the court to all the justices to look through those issues and come up with a ruling that they're all satisfied with.
And how important is the impact of these decisions?
Extremely important impact, no matter what the results. I mean, even the most narrow result, that I could imagine, such as the court deciding that, for example, in the Proposition 8 case, they could decide that the people raising the appeal from the lower court below that had struck down Proposition 8, they could say those people don't have standing to raise that appeal, which would mean it would be a decision that would just apply to California. That would still be hugely impactful because California is such a populous state, and there are so many people there that want to get married. So even in the most narrow version of these opinions that I can think of, where the court makes some sort of movement or some sort of acceptance of gay marriage, are bound to be impactful. Certainly, a ruling against marriage equality would be a serious matter as well, enshrining constitutional precedent that would make it harder to advance those rights in the future.
Yeah. So I guess now we listen, and then we're going to wait for a while and see what comes out.
We'll listen this week, and then we'll wait, and then maybe we'll talk again.
All right. Sounds good. Erin Buzuvis from Western New England University Law. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. We'll definitely keep an eye on what happens down in Washington.